What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable legends sits down with one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? The answer is nothing short of explosive. Jack Nicholson, the three-time Oscar winner, known for his razor-sharp wit and refusal to play by anyone's rules, walked onto the set of The View expecting a typical promotional interview. What he got instead was a confrontation that would leave the studio audience gasping, the co-host scrambling, and Joy Behar wondering if she'd finally met her match. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. This was a masterclass in tension, a battle of egos, and a reminder that some stars simply cannot be tamed. Before we dive into every shocking moment of this incredible exchange, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on. Trust me, you're going to want to weigh in on this one. The View's studio was buzzing with its usual energy that morning. The audience had filed in, excited for what they assumed would be another entertaining episode. Jack Nicholson was scheduled to appear promoting his latest project, and the producers had hyped his appearance all week. Nicholson, now in his 80s, but still carrying that unmistakable aura of defiance, walked onto the stage wearing his signature sunglasses and a sly grin that suggested he knew something everyone else didn't. The co-hosts greeted him warmly, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly cordial. Whoopi Goldberg asked about his new film, and Jack delivered his answers with that characteristic charm, that playful arrogance that had made him a legend. But anyone who knows The View knows that the real fireworks often start when Joy Behar enters the conversation. Joy, never one to shy away from controversy, had been waiting for her moment. She leaned forward in her chair, her expression shifting from friendly to probing, and that's when the temperature in the room began to rise. "Jack," she began, her tone carrying just enough edge to signal that this wasn't going to be a softball question. "You've been in this industry for over 50 years. You've seen it all, done it all. But let me ask you something. Do you think Hollywood has changed for the better, or do you think we've lost something along the way?" It was a loaded question, the kind designed to elicit either a politically correct response or something controversial enough to generate headlines. Jack knew it. The audience knew it. And judging by the slight smirk on Joy's face, she knew it too. Jack took off his sunglasses slowly, folding them with deliberate precision before setting them on the table. He looked directly at Joy, his eyes sharp and assessing. "You want me to say it's better now, don't you?" he said, his voice carrying that gravelly texture that could turn any sentence into an event. "You want me to talk about progress and evolution and how enlightened we've all become?" He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. "But I'm not going to do that, Joy, because that's not how I see it." The studio went quiet. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath. Joy's smile tightened, but she maintained her composure. "So you think it was better before?" she challenged. "When women had fewer opportunities, when people of color were marginalized, when the entire system was built for a very specific type of person." Jack leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed by the confrontational tone. "That's not what I said," he replied calmly. "But since you're putting words in my mouth, let me clarify. I think Hollywood has always been flawed. It was flawed then, and it's flawed now. The difference is that back then, we made films that took risks. We told stories that made people uncomfortable. We didn't worry about offending every single demographic or checking every box on some corporate checklist. We made art, Joy. Real art, not algorithm-driven content designed to maximize streaming numbers." The audience stirred, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging uncertain glances. Whoopi tried to interject, sensing the need to redirect, but Joy wasn't finished. "So you're saying that the push for diversity and inclusion has somehow made Hollywood worse?" she pressed, her voice rising slightly. "That's what you're saying?" Jack's expression hardened. "I'm saying that when you make art by committee, when every decision is filtered through a dozen focus groups and sensitivity readers, you lose something essential. You lose the raw, the honest, the dangerous. And yes, Joy, I think that's a problem." The tension was palpable now. Joy's face had flushed, and her hands were gesturing more animatedly than before. "But Jack, you're talking about a time when the industry actively excluded people. You're romanticizing an era that was only golden for a very select group. How can you not see that?" Jack didn't raise his voice, but his intensity increased. "I see it perfectly fine, and I'm not romanticizing anything. I'm saying that you can fight for equality and representation without sacrificing artistic integrity. Those things aren't mutually exclusive, but somewhere along the way, Hollywood decided they were. And now we're drowning in mediocrity, disguised as progress. The other co-hosts exchanged nervous glances. Sonny Hostin attempted to step in. Jack, I think what Joy is trying to understand is whether you believe the changes in Hollywood, the increased representation, the greater awareness of social issues, have been positive overall. Jack turned his attention to Sonny, his demeanor softening slightly. Of course, I believe representation matters. Of course, I want everyone to have a fair shot. But I refuse to pretend that every change has been an improvement. I refuse to celebrate a system that's become so terrified of controversy that it's forgotten how to be bold. He turned back to Joy. And I refuse to sit here and let you twist my words into something they're not just because it fits your narrative. Joy's eyes flashed. My narrative? She repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. Jack, I'm asking you legitimate questions. If you're uncomfortable answering them, that's one thing. But don't accuse me of having an agenda just because I'm challenging your perspective. Jack laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. Joy, everyone on this show has an agenda. That's what makes it watchable. But here's the difference between you and me. I'm willing to admit that I have opinions that might not be popular. You, on the other hand, dress up your opinions as moral imperatives and then act shocked when someone pushes back. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row leaned forward, completely absorbed in the confrontation unfolding before them. Joy's co-hosts looked like they wanted to be anywhere else, but Joy herself seemed energized by the conflict. So now you're attacking me personally. Joy shot back, her voice sharp. Is that where we are now? Jack shook his head. I'm not attacking you. I'm pointing out that you asked me a question, expecting a certain answer. And when I didn't give it to you, you tried to paint me as some kind of dinosaur who longs for the bad old days. That's not fair, and you know it. Joy leaned forward, her elbows on the table. What I know, Jack, is that you've built a career on being difficult, on being unpredictable, on refusing to conform. And that's fine. That's your brand. But when you come on a show like this and make sweeping statements about Hollywood losing its way, you have to expect that people are going to question what you mean by that. You have to expect that people are going to ask whether you're really talking about artistic integrity or whether you're just uncomfortable with change. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like he might stand up and walk off the set. Instead, he leaned forward, matching Joy's posture, his voice low and controlled. You want to know what makes me uncomfortable, Joy? What makes me uncomfortable is that we live in a time where you can't have a nuanced conversation about anything without someone trying to reduce it to the simplest, most inflammatory interpretation possible. I said Hollywood has lost something. I didn't say it was better when women and minorities were excluded. I didn't say we should go back to some imaginary golden age. What I said was that in our rush to fix the very real problems of the past, we've created new problems. And if you can't understand that distinction, then maybe this conversation is pointless. Joy didn't back down. If anything, Jack's words seemed to fuel her determination to press him further. No, Jack, this conversation isn't pointless. This conversation is exactly what we need to have, because what you're describing, this idea that Hollywood has somehow become too cautious, too concerned with representation. That sounds an awful lot like the kind of complaint we hear from people who are uncomfortable giving up their privilege. The words hit like a slap, and the studio fell into a stunned silence. Even the producers in the control room must have been holding their breath, wondering if they should cut to commercial or let this play out. Jack's face remained remarkably calm, but his eyes had gone cold. Privilege, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. That's your trump card, isn't it? When you can't win an argument on its merits, you just accuse the other person of being privileged, and suddenly you're the winner by default. Joy's face reddened. I'm not playing cards, Jack. I'm trying to understand how someone with your intelligence and experience can look at an industry that's finally starting to include voices that have been silenced for decades and say that we've lost something important. What have we lost? The ability to make films that only speak to one demographic. The comfort of not having to think about perspectives different from our own. Jack's laugh was bitter. You're doing it again. You're taking what I said and turning it into the worst possible version of itself. I never said inclusion was the problem. I said that the way we're going about it, the corporate-mandated checkbox ticking, focus group-tested way we're going about it, is killing creativity. There's a difference between genuine representation and performative diversity. Joy. And if you can't see that, then you're part of the problem. The accusation struck a nerve. Joy's hand came down on the table with enough force to make the coffee cups rattle. "I'm part of the problem," she said, her voice rising. "I've spent my entire career fighting for the kind of changes you're now complaining about. I've used this platform to amplify voices that don't usually get heard. And you have the audacity to sit here and tell me I'm part of the problem." Jack didn't flinch. "Yes, Joy, because you've confused fighting for representation with fighting for conformity. You want everyone to think the same way, say the same things, hold the same opinions, and anyone who doesn't fall in line gets labeled and dismissed. That's not progress. That's authoritarianism with a friendly face." The other hosts finally found their voices. Whoopi raised her hands in a calming gesture. Okay, let's everybody take a breath here. We're getting heated, and I think we're losing sight of the actual conversation." But Joy wasn't ready to de-escalate. "No, Whoopi, I want to hear this. I want Jack to explain to me how advocating for diversity and inclusion is somehow authoritarian. Please, Jack, enlighten me." Jack's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now that hadn't been there before. "You're not advocating for diversity, Joy. You're enforcing uniformity. Real diversity means accepting that people are going to have different opinions, different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world. But in your version of Hollywood, in your version of society, there's only one acceptable way to think, and anyone who deviates from that gets canceled, gets labeled, gets destroyed. That's not diversity. That's tyranny." Joy's eyes widened. "Tyranny? You're comparing me to a tyrant because I believe in social justice." Jack shook his head slowly. "I'm saying that social justice has become a weapon. It's become a way to shut down conversations, to silence dissent, to enforce conformity. And the people wielding that weapon think they're the heroes of the story, when really, they're just the new establishment protecting their own power." The studio audience was divided now. Some people were nodding vigorously, while others looked outraged. Joy seemed momentarily stunned by the directness of Jack's accusation, but she recovered quickly. "That is one of the most offensive things I've ever heard on this show," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "To suggest that people fighting for equality and justice are somehow the oppressors. That's not just wrong, Jack. That's dangerous." Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "What's dangerous, Joy, is that you can't even entertain the possibility that I might have a point. What's dangerous is that you're so convinced of your own righteousness that you can't see how your tactics mirror the very things you claim to oppose. You want to silence people who disagree with you. You want to punish people for having the wrong opinions. You want to create a world where everyone thinks exactly like you do. And you call that progress." Joy's hands were trembling now. Whether from anger or something else, it was hard to tell. "I don't want to silence anyone, Jack, but I also don't think we should give a platform to ideas that are harmful. There's a difference between having a different opinion and promoting views that hurt people." Jack's response was immediate. "And who gets to decide which views are harmful? Joy, you, some committee. The mob on Twitter. That's the problem. You've appointed yourself and people like you as the arbiters of acceptable thought, and anyone who questions that arrangement gets attacked." Sonny tried again to mediate. "I think there's some common ground here, if we look for it. Both of you care about art, about storytelling, about the impact that media has on society. Maybe we can focus on that instead of the conflict." But Jack wasn't finished. "There's no common ground when one side refuses to acknowledge that the other side might have legitimate concerns. Joy asked me if Hollywood has changed for the better. I gave her an honest answer. And instead of engaging with what I actually said, she tried to make me into a villain. That's the problem with these conversations. There's no room for nuance anymore. There's no room for complexity. You're either with us or against us. And that's a terrifying way to run a society." Joy found her footing again. "You know what's terrifying, Jack? The idea that someone with your platform, with your influence, is out here telling people that efforts to create a more equitable industry are somehow oppressive. Do you have any idea how many young actors, young filmmakers, young writers of color, young women, young LGBTQ artists are finally getting opportunities they never would have had in your precious old Hollywood? And you want to tell them that? Their success is somehow less valid because it came through, what did you call it, corporate-mandated checkbox ticking? Jack's face hardened. Don't put words in my mouth. I never said their success was less valid. I said the system that claims to support them is flawed. I said that when you reduce people to checkboxes and demographics, you're not honoring their individuality or their talent. You're tokenizing them. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Joy's mouth opened and closed, and for a moment she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. When she found her voice again, it was quieter but no less intense. That is incredibly insulting. To every person who has fought their way into this industry, despite all the barriers that were put in their way, you're suggesting that their opportunities aren't real, that they're just tokens. Jack shook his head firmly. I'm suggesting that the system is using them. I'm suggesting that studios and networks put diverse faces on screen, not because they genuinely value those perspectives, but because it's good for their brand. And when the next trend comes along, they'll drop those artists just as quickly as they pick them up. That's what I mean by performative. It's not real change, it's marketing. Joy leaned forward again, her voice rising. So what's your solution? Jack, should we go back to the way things were? Should we stop pushing for representation? Should we just let the industry remain the exclusive club it's always been? Jack's response was swift. My solution is to stop pretending. Stop pretending that every corporate initiative is genuine. Stop pretending that representation without creative freedom means anything. Stop pretending that we can't criticize the way change is happening just because we support the idea of change. My solution is honesty, joy, radical honesty. And I know that makes people uncomfortable, but I don't care. I've never cared about being comfortable, and I'm not going to start now. Joy's laugh was sharp and humorless. Radical honesty. That's rich, coming from someone who's made a career out of playing characters, out of pretending to be other people. Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The difference between acting and what you do, Joy, is that when I play a character, everyone knows it's a performance. When you perform your outrage, when you perform your moral superiority, you pretend it's authentic. At least I'm honest about my dishonesty. The comment landed like a punch. Joy's face flushed red, and her co-hosts looked genuinely alarmed now. Whoopi put a hand on Joy's arm, but Joy shook it off. How dare you, she said, her voice trembling. How dare you come on this show and insult me? Insult what we do here. Insult the very idea of standing up for what's right. Jack's voice was calm, almost gentle now, which somehow made his words cut deeper. I'm not insulting you for standing up for what you believe in, Joy. I'm insulting you for refusing to admit that you might be wrong about some things. I'm insulting you for weaponizing morality to win arguments instead of engaging with ideas. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech that made everyone in the studio jump. The other co-hosts looked at each other with wide eyes, clearly unsure whether they should intervene or let this moment play out. Jack remained seated, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The contrast between Joy's visible agitation and Jack's eerie calm made the tension even more palpable. You know what, Jack, Joy said, her voice shaking but determined. I have sat here and listened to you pontificate about the state of Hollywood, about my supposed moral superiority, about how people like me are ruining everything, and I've tried to have a reasonable conversation with you. But you're not interested in conversation. You're interested in provocation. You always have been. Jack tilted his head slightly, studying her with those penetrating eyes that had captivated audiences for decades. If you think I'm only interested in provocation, then you haven't been paying attention to anything I've actually said. But that's the problem, isn't it? You stopped listening the moment I didn't give you the answer you wanted. Joy pointed a finger at him, her hand still trembling. I stopped listening. I've done nothing but listen to you tear down everything that people have worked for. Everything that's made this industry even slightly better than it was when you started. And for what? So you can feel superior. So you can play the rebel one more time. Jack finally showed a crack in his composure, his jaw tightening visibly. I don't need to play anything, Joy. I am who I am. I've always been who I am. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if that challenges your worldview, then maybe you should ask yourself why. The audience was completely silent now, transfixed by the confrontation. Some people had their phones out, clearly recording what they sensed was a historic moment. Whoopi made another attempt to restore order. Okay, I think we need to take a commercial break and let everyone cool down. But Joy wasn't done. No, Whoopi, we're going to finish this. Jack, you want to talk about who I am? Fine, I'm someone who believes that words matter. I'm someone who believes that people with platforms have responsibilities. I'm someone who believes that we should use our voices to make things better, not to tear things down just because we can. Jack stood up slowly, and the simple act of him rising to his feet seemed to shift the entire energy in the room. He was tall, imposing in a way that had nothing to do with physical stature and everything to do with presence. Words matter, Jack repeated, his voice low and deliberate. On that, we agree. And my words, the words you're so offended by, are that Hollywood has lost its courage. It's lost its willingness to take risks, to offend, to challenge. And you prove my point every time you react like this. Every time someone says something you don't like and you treat it as a personal attack rather than an opportunity for discussion. Joy crossed her arms, her stance defensive. This isn't about me being offended, Jack. This is about you using this platform to spread a narrative that undermines the real progress that's been made. You talk about courage, but what's courageous about complaining that things aren't like they used to be? What's courageous about punching down at people who are finally getting a seat at the table? Jack's eyes flashed with genuine anger for the first time. Punching down. Is that what you think I'm doing? Joy, I've spent my entire career working with people from every background, supporting artists who are taking risks, championing films that nobody else would touch. Don't you dare accuse me of punching down just because I refuse to worship at the altar of your particular brand of progressivism. Joy took a step closer to him, her voice rising. Your brand? Jack, caring about equality isn't a brand. Fighting for representation isn't a trend. These are fundamental issues of human dignity, and if you can't see that, then maybe you have become the dinosaur I suggested you were. The insult hit its mark. Jack's face darkened, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold. There it is. When you can't win the argument, you go for the personal attack. You call me old, you call me irrelevant. You dismiss everything I've said because it's easier than actually engaging with the substance of my criticism. Who had been silent through most of the exchange, finally spoke up. I think both of you are making valid points, but maybe we're talking past each other. Jack, when you talk about Hollywood losing something, what specifically do you mean? Can you give us an example? Jack turned his attention to Sarah, and his demeanor softened slightly. Thank you for actually asking. Yes, I can give you an example. When I made 5 Easy Pieces, when I made Chinatown, when I made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, those films didn't care about being likable. They didn't care about giving audiences what they expected. They were messy, complicated, challenging. The characters weren't heroes. They were flawed human beings, and that's what made them real. Today, every character has to have a redemption arc. Every story has to have a clear moral. Every film has to pass a dozen different tests before it even gets made. And in that process, we've lost the rawness, the authenticity, the willingness to show human beings in all their ugly complexity. Joy jumped back in before Sarah could respond. So your problem is that films today have morals, that characters learn and grow, that stories have something to say beyond just wallowing in darkness and cynicism. Jack shook his head in frustration. You're doing it again. You're reducing what I said to the worst possible interpretation. I'm not advocating for cynicism. I'm advocating for honesty. I'm saying that when you sanitize art, when you make it safe and palatable and inoffensive, you rob it of its power. Art is supposed to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. But today's Hollywood only wants to do the latter. It wants to tell people what they already believe, make them feel good about their existing opinions, and never challenge them in any meaningful way. Joy's voice dripped with sarcasm. Oh, I see. So films that center women, or people of color, or LGBTQ characters, those are just making people feel good about their existing opinions. They're not challenging anything. Jack's response was sharp. Some of them are. Some of them are genuinely groundbreaking and important. But many of them, Joy, are just checking boxes. They're products designed by corporations to appeal to specific demographics. And you know what the tragedy is? When you reduce representation to a marketing strategy, you actually undermine the very cause you claim to support. You make it about profits instead of about people. And that's what I'm criticizing. Not the artists, not the stories, but the system that's commodified their experiences. Joy paused, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually consider his point. But then she shook her head. That's a convenient argument, Jack. It allows you to criticize diversity initiatives while claiming you're not against diversity. It lets you position yourself as the authentic voice while dismissing everyone else as corporate sellouts. But here's what I think. I think you're uncomfortable with the fact that Hollywood doesn't revolve around people like you anymore. I think you're uncomfortable with the fact that the stories being told aren't always about your experiences, your worldview, your version of authenticity. Jack's voice was dangerously quiet. People like me. And what kind of people is that? Joy? Go ahead, say it. You've been dancing around it this whole conversation. Just say what you really mean. The challenge hung in the air. Joy's face went pale, then red, as she realized the trap she'd walked into. I'm not playing that game with you, Jack. You know exactly what I mean. Jack took a step closer, his voice measured but intense. No, I don't. And neither does anyone watching this. You've spent this entire conversation making insinuations, suggesting that my criticisms come from some place of privilege or bias. But you won't actually come out and say what you're implying, because if you did, you'd have to defend it. And you can't, because it's not true. So instead, you hide behind vague accusations and moral posturing. Joy's hands clenched into fists at her sides. I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm saying that when someone who has benefited enormously from the old system complains about the new system, it's worth examining their motives. I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, your discomfort with modern Hollywood has less to do with artistic integrity and more to do with the fact that you're no longer the center of attention. Jack laughed, and it was a harsh, bitter sound. The center of attention. Joy, I could walk away from this industry tomorrow and never look back. I don't need the attention. I don't need the validation. What I need is to be able to speak honestly without being psychoanalyzed by someone who thinks she has me all figured out based on a 10-minute conversation. Joy's voice was sharp. I've known you longer than 10 minutes, Jack. I've watched your career. I've seen your interviews. And I've noticed a pattern. Whenever the industry changes in ways you don't like, you complain about integrity and authenticity. But when those changes benefit you or people like you, suddenly there's no problem. Jack's face hardened into something unreadable. You think you know me? You don't. Asterisk. So there you have it, one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Jack Nicholson and Joy Behar went head-to-head, and neither one backed down. Don't forget to subscribe and drop your comment.